What if the defining characteristic of a disease, like the very symptom everyone immediately recognizes,
Yeah.
what if that isn't actually the disease itself?
Right, like what if it's just a symptom of something else?
Yeah, exactly. What if that defining trait is just the final tragic echo of this totally silent process that started, I mean, decades ago in a completely different part of your body?
It completely upends how we think about human biology, honestly.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, we're so conditioned to view health as this binary state, like you feel fine or you feel sick.
Right, you go to the doctor, they run a scan.
Exactly. They point to a broken bone or a tumor and they're like, boom, there's the enemy. It's a very mechanical, visible way of understanding our bodies.
But when you step into the world of neurodegenerative conditions, that entire paradigm just kind of collapses. You're suddenly navigating this landscape that is entirely murky.
Yeah, or a condition can just, live inside you, completely invisible for years or even decades.
Before anyone, even a top specialist, knows what to look for. So welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking a profoundly moving and honestly structurally fascinating body of work called The Liat Show.
And for those of you listening who might be new to this, the Liat Show is not just a standard article or like a simple medical blog.
No, not at all.
It's this incredibly expansive, continuous body of work. It actively combines lived observation, culture, scientific research, healthcare infrastructure.
Plus AI, systems thinking, and this deeply personal memory layer.
Right, all published in these interconnected sets and series, creating this massive multi-domain storytelling universe.
And the architect of this entire universe is Liat Portal. And just to make sure we get the pronunciation absolutely correct for you listening, her first name is Liat, pronounced as a long Lee, and then triple at Portal.
Today we're exploring the first 3 episodes of her Parkinson series, which she actually co-wrote with Dr. Minna Schmidt.
Right, and Dr. Schmidt brings this incredibly vital scientific lens to the work, right? She's a dedicated Parkinson's disease researcher at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging.
Yeah, and together, Portal and Schmidt tackle this core problem right out of the gate, the devastating gap in visibility.
The idea that Parkinson's becomes visible, altering a person's life in subtle ways, long before families, patients, or the public actually know how to read what they're seeing.
Exactly. But before we go any further into the biology or the cultural icons involved, we need to establish some guardrails for our discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a critical point. This exploration is incredibly grounded. We are analyzing a profound intersection of personal narrative and hard scientific research.
Right. So this discussion is not an exaggeration. It's not a commercial for a product.
Definitely not a fundraising pitch.
And most importantly, we want to be absolutely clear that we are not offering medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or clinical guidance of any kind.
Right. We're purely here to explore the insights and narratives presented in this specific written series. So let's start where the series starts, with family.
The family layer.
Yeah. And I found it incredibly compelling that in a series co-authored by a serious neurodegenerative researcher, the opening chapter doesn't hit you with, like, lab results or protein structures.
Right. No medical jargon right away.
Exactly. It starts with an intimate memory of Lou's uncle, Henry Portal. And when you think about it, that makes perfect sense. Parkinson's is not just a clinical code printed on a medical chart.
No, it's an invasion.
It deeply affects movement, dignity, caregiving, family roles, identity, shame, the daily fabric of an entire household.
It completely reshapes the ecosystem of a family. And Henry Portal, he was Liat's father's oldest brother, the firstborn son of his family in Marrakesh, Morocco.
And to understand the tragedy of his diagnosis, you really have to understand who Henry was before the disease took hold.
Exactly. He was a man entirely defined by his physical capabilities, his kinetic connection to the world around him.
He was a gifted artist. He painted these incredibly vivid memories of Morocco and beautiful biblical scenes.
So his artistic talent flowed directly through his hands.
Right. And on top of that, he was a draftsman for a civil engineering company. So he relied entirely on precision and steady movement.
Not to mention, he was a massive sports fan.
Oh, yeah, especially soccer. His legs were his source of power and joy. His body was literally the central instrument for everything he loved most in this world.
Which is what makes the slow, invisible arrival of his symptoms all the more heartbreaking. Henry was officially diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 64.
And that was only after the family finally pushed for medical answers, right?
Yeah, they noticed him losing his balance and physically stumbling over objects around the house. But the narrative makes this deeply poignant observation. looking back with the benefit of hindsight, the symptoms had actually been there for quite a while.
The signs were totally visible in his daily life, but nobody in the family possessed the vocabulary to read them. Okay, let's unpack this.
Go for it.
I think about it like staring at an abstract painting in a museum. You look at it for years, and you just see this chaotic arrangement of lines and colors. It means nothing to you.
Right, it's just noise.
Exactly. And then someone walks up and simply tells you the title of the painting. Suddenly, all those hidden shapes and overlapping colors make devastating perfect sense.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You realize the picture was there the whole time. You lacked the framing to comprehend it.
That's a perfect analogy. And that lack of framing, it carries a heavy emotional toll. I mean, Henry lived with Parkinson's for 16 long, grueling years.
16 years.
Yeah. And the specific cruelty of this disease is that it isolates the mind. Henry's intellect remained incredibly sharp while his body's functions steadily betrayed him.
So for a man who built his entire life around fierce physical independence, from drafting to painting to sports, the loss of his bodily control meant a fundamental loss of his core identity. There's this very specific, heartbreaking detail about his routine that really drove this home for me. It wasn't just the loss of painting. It was the psychological weight of his changing role in the community.
Oh, the walk to the synagogue.
Yes. Henry felt this profound, crushing shame when his wife Liat's aunt had to begin physically walking him to the synagogue. Tell me about that.
Well, because that walk crossed a very specific threshold. It marked the exact moment his physical dependence became impossible to hide from his neighbors and his community.
Right. When Parkinson strips away your ability to move independently, it also strips away your privacy.
Exactly. That shift from a private family struggle behind closed doors to a public reality is incredibly vulnerable.
And, that transition from the private home to the public eye, it perfectly mirrors the transition the series makes into the clinical reality of the disease.
Yeah, absolutely.
What Henry experienced, that slow, visible physical decline, is what almost everyone pictures when they hear the word Parkinson's.
Right. That's what the medical community calls the visible layer. But Dr. Minna-Schmidt's contribution to the series completely fractures that assumption.
How so?
She explains that what we see, even the most severe motor symptoms, is entirely on the surface. It's the end result, not the entirety of the condition.
So the surface level is the tremors, the rigidity, the shaking. It's the slowed movement, which clinically is called bradykinesia, right?
Bradykinesia, yeah.
Yeah.
We see a person lose physical control, and we assume we're watching the disease in action.
But Dr. Schmidt argues that underneath those visible motor symptoms, Parkinson's actually involves a labyrinth of complex biological systems that researchers still don't fully grasp.
Exactly. She points to the microbiome, the gut-brain axis, the vagus nerve, the sense of smell, and the overarching process of aging itself.
Wait, aging? I think it's worth pausing on that because it clarifies why Dr. Schmidt is involved in this project.
Yeah.
She works at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, traditionally, society treats aging as just a passive reality, like background noise or a convenient excuse for why our bodies eventually break down.
Right. Like, oh, you're just getting older.
Exactly. But the Buck Institute approaches aging as a distinct, measurable, and highly active biological process.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping this. They're saying aging isn't just the passage of time. It's a mechanism happening inside us.
Exactly that. They've identified 12 specific biological hallmarks of aging.
Oh, wow. Like what?
Things like chronic inflammation, cellular senescence, which is where cells stop dividing but refuse to die, and genetic alterations.
And this matters for our discussion because
Parkinson's, much like Alzheimer's, is fundamentally an age-related neurodegenerative syndrome. As our cells age, their internal cleanup mechanisms fail.
So the environment inside our bodies changes.
Exactly. You cannot possibly hope to cure or truly understand Parkinson's without understanding the biological aging process that creates the hospitable environment for the disease to thrive in the first place.
That reframes everything. But, it also introduces a massive structural hurdle, which the series bluntly refers to as the time problem.
Oh, the time problem, yeah.
For you listening, if you assume that once a disease is identified, science just quickly whips up a cure in a lab, this part is really sobering. Healthcare research, especially when it involves the complexities of aging and neurodegeneration, it moves at a glacial pace compared to a human lifespan.
It really does. The time problem is the central tragedy of clinical research. When scientists use aging models, like observing mice in a laboratory setting, They often have to wait 2 to 3 entire years just to see the results of a single experiment.
2 to 3 years for one experiment.
Yeah, and that's just one tiny piece of the puzzle. The process of hypothesis, funding, animal trials, human trials, and regulatory approval, it takes decades.
Which means patients like Henry Portal desperately need these medical discoveries long before the scientific infrastructure is actually ready to deliver them. If we want a viable treatment or a cure a decade from now, the reality is that we needed to start heavily funding and executing that specific research 20 or 30 years ago.
The timeline of human suffering vastly outpaces the timeline of scientific discovery.
It's so unfair. And this systemic delay highlights why broad public awareness is so incredibly urgent. Which brings us to the next part of the narrative.
Yeah, the series pushes outward here. It moves from Henry's private struggle past the clinical laboratories and scales up to massive global visibility.
Right. In episode 3, Liat explores what happens when this invisible disease infiltrates a highly public body long before the general public has any idea how to interpret the signs.
This is where cultural memory crashes into medical reality.
Exactly. The series focuses on 2 monumental pop culture icons who completely redefined how the world sees Parkinson's disease. Let's start with Michael J. Fox.
Okay, yeah.
Liat viewed him as an absolute childhood hero, and for an entire generation raised on Back to the Future, Michael J. Fox, playing Marty McFly, wasn't just an actor. He was the physical embodiment of youth.
Absolutely. He represented speed, impeccable comedic timing, and total fluid physical control.
He was a teenager who literally manipulated time on a skateboard.
I know. His entire cinematic identity was built on kinetic energy. He never just walked into a room. He slid, he jumped, he reacted with lightning-fast precision.
Which is why his public diagnosis was such a seismic shock to Liat, and frankly, to the rest of the world.
Yeah, it changed everything.
By stepping forward, Fox made Parkinson's visible as a condition that could attack the young. He completely shattered this deeply ingrained, comforting myth that Parkinson's was strictly an old person's disease.
Which is huge.
Liat actually writes about the jarring realization that her childhood wishes, hoping to see Back to the Future sequels with the actors running around their 80s were completely dashed.
That's heartbreaking.
The universe took the very qualities that defined Fox's public image, his movement and his timing, and turned them into a battleground.
It is a profound paradox. And the series contrasts Fox's experience with another titan of pop culture, Ozzy Osbourne.
Right. Now that is a totally different story.
Entirely different. Ozzy's public identity was constructed on an entirely different foundation. He was the Prince of Darkness.
Great.
His brand was built on heavy sound, absolute chaos, a terrifying stage presence, and this ultimate, almost supernatural survival.
People looked at Ozzy and thought he was indestructible because of the sheer volume of substance abuse and wild behavior he had lived through.
Exactly. I think people just assumed his shaking or his slurred speech was the natural hangover of a rock and roll lifestyle. They blamed the chaos, not a neurological disease.
That's exactly the point. Ozzy made the disease visible through immense public vulnerability. But for 16 years, his health struggles were hiding in plain sight.
16 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
He endured injuries, surgeries, physical decline, but it all blended seamlessly into his chaotic stage persona and his family's reality TV dynamics.
The audience's memory and perception basically masked the clinical reality.
Right. It wasn't until he finally received and shared the official Parkinson's diagnosis that everyone looked back and realized the disease had been writing his physical narrative for over a decade.
So when you look at Fox and Osbourne together, it forces a massive cognitive shift. We have these 2 cultural icons, one known for absolute physical control, the other known for chaotic survival.
So what does this all mean?
Well, when they publicly lose those exact traits, it doesn't just make the disease famous. It forces us to completely reconsider the timeline of the illness.
Yeah. It forces the public and the medical community to confront a staggering scientific question, which is really the absolute crux of episode 3.
Right. If Michael J. Fox had this disease while he was still moving at lightning speed on camera, and if Ozzy Osbourne had it while he was still commanding global stadium tours, what is actually happening inside the human body before Parkinson's becomes visible to the outside world?
If you are listening to this right now, this is the moment where everything we thought we knew about neurodegeneration flips upside down.
Completely.
The visible symptoms, the tremors, the stiffness, the bradykinesia are not the starting line.
Dr. Minishmidt's research insights break this wide open. The current scientific understanding is shifting to recognize that Parkinson's might not actually originate as a brain disease.
Wait, I need to stop you there. Because the phrase neurodegenerative literally implies it starts in the neurons of the brain. How can it not be a brain disease?
Well, it eventually ravages the brain, yes. But Dr. Schmidt outlines the concept of two distinct potential subtypes of the disease: brain first and body first Parkinson's.
Okay, body first, what does that mean?
In the body first hypothesis, the origin point of the disease is located far outside the central structures of the brain. The leading research points to two highly specific areas:
Which are?
the gastrointestinal system, which scientists often call our second brain because of its massive independent nervous system, and the olfactory bulb, which is the neural structure responsible for our sense of smell.
Wait, so for you listening to this while drinking your morning coffee or walking down a city street, you are probably wondering how on earth your stomach digesting a pastry or your nose-smelling car exhaust has anything to do with a neurological tremor 20 years from now. Why the gut and the nose?
Because of our environment.
Environment.
Yeah, the GL tract and the olfactory bulb share one critical vulnerability. They are the primary interfaces where our internal biology makes direct, constant contact with the external world.
Oh, I see.
Every time we eat, we are introducing external bacteria, chemicals, and potential toxins into our gut microbiome. And every time we breathe, we are pulling airborne substances, pollutants, pesticides, microscopic particles directly across the olfactory bulb.
So the olfactory bulb is essentially acting as a porous border wall between the outside environment and our brain.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The leading hypothesis is that an environmental exposure, something we ingest or inhale, breaches that border wall.
Yeah.
It interacts with the local nervous system in the gut or the nose and triggers a specific protein called alpha-synuclein to misfold.
And once that protein misfolds, it acts like a corrupted file. But how does a corrupted file in my stomach cause a tremor in my hand?
Through the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
Yeah, the vagus nerve is an anatomical superhighway that runs all the way from your gut through your chest directly into the base of your brain.
Wow.
The theory is that this misfolded protein physically travels up that superhighway or through the olfactory pathways, slowly spreading the corruption cell by cell, millimeter by millimeter, into the central brain structures.
And this migration process can take years or even decades to complete.
Exactly.
Decades.
Think about the implications of that. Think about Henry Portal or Michael J. Fox or Ozzy Osbourne. By the time the classic motor symptoms actually manifest, by the time the hand shakes or the balance is lost, or the doctor finally recognizes the signs, those visible symptoms are just the final domino falling in a massive chain reaction.
A reaction that's been happening in the dark for years? Right. The chain has been moving in the dark, traveling up the vagus nerve, for decades. By the time the disease is visible, it is arriving incredibly late to its own party.
The visible symptoms are not the onset of the disease. They are the late-stage macroscopic manifestations of a microscopic biological process that has been quietly reshaping the internal environment for a significant portion of the patient's life.
That completely obliterates how we think about early detection.
It really does.
If this theory holds, waiting for a tremor is like waiting for a house to collapse before checking for termites. It suggests we need to be looking at chronic gut issues, or a sudden, unexplained loss of smell in our 30s or 40s, as potential early warning systems for a neurological earthquake decades down the line.
When you synthesize this entire journey, you can truly appreciate the masterful narrative architecture that Liat Portal and Dr. Schmidt have built in these first 3 episodes.
Oh, definitely.
The progression is seamless but expansive. They start with a deeply intimate, emotional family memory of Henry Portal. Then they use his story to scale up to the clinical distinction between visible motor symptoms and the invisible biological aging process.
And then they expand that clinical reality into massive cultural visibility by examining the public lives of Michael J. Fox and Ozzy Osbourne.
It's brilliant. It takes a subject that could easily become an overwhelmingly dense medical textbook and anchors it entirely in pure humanity.
It really makes the science feel urgent, personal, and profoundly relevant to anyone who has a body.
Absolutely.
For you listening, if your mind is racing right now with the implications of all this, I highly encourage you to seek out this work. But pace yourself, because there is a massive amount of insight to absorb here. What we have covered today is just the very first cluster of an expansive written series that continues deeply across 8 full episodes.
The depth only increases from here. The subsequent episodes of Liat Show dive much further into the hard data, the profound psychological and physical role of caregivers, and the massive systemic infrastructure required to actually fund and accelerate this vital research.
Right, so we can finally overcome that time problem we discussed.
Exactly.
So we want to make sure you can find this work easily. Here are your navigation steps. Go to Substack or open your preferred search engine and type in the Liat Show Parkinson series.
You can also search directly for the key figures we discussed. Liat Portal, Dr. Minna Schmidt, Henry Portal, Michael J. Fox, or Ozzy Osbourne.
Yes, or you can search for the specific phrase, making the invisible visible. We highly encourage you to calmly subscribe and follow the full 8-episode series on Substack and explore how Liat's continuous storytelling connects across all of her other platforms.
It really is a remarkable multi-domain achievement in science communication and personal essay. And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
I love these. Let's hear it.
We have spent this entire time unpacking how the most famous, visible signs of Parkinson's disease are actually just its final acts. So as you breathe the air on your commute or eat your next meal, you have to wonder, how much of our own future biological story is currently being written by the invisible environment we interact with every single day, long before we ever learn how to read the signs?
Wow. It makes you wonder, if our bodies are actively absorbing the world around us, maybe we shouldn't just be waiting for the obvious symptoms to break the surface. Maybe the real challenge of the next frontier of medicine is learning how to read the shadows that have been living inside us all along.